John A. Blake, born in 1926, in my opinion, and in many opinion of his contemporaries, a remarkable figure, and should be acclaimed in the modern era. We're just short of his bicentenary of his birth. John A. Blake, as he's often referred to, or John Blake, was a great Waterford and Irishman, has earned his place in the history by his making remarkable contributions to the life, indeed the lives of his native city and country. We'll start by going to the end and referring to one of the fine obituaries that were written to him following his sudden death in 1878. This one from the Waterford News, published in May 27, a couple of days after his death, says, the announcement of the painfully sudden death of Mr. John A. Blake was received with the most sincere regret by all classes in this city on last Monday. Possessed of broad views, a cultured mind, and a kindly nature, Mr. Blake's merits were early recognized, and no one more popular or respected has lived in Waterford in recent times. Born in this city, Mr. Blake passed his early years here and devoted much of his activity and indomitable energy which characterized his life to furthering the interest of his fellow citizens. Although compelled on many occasions to differ with the expressed views of Mr. Blake, the editor speaking, we ever found him an opponent who did not believe in abuse as an argument, and who, if he could not convince by sound logic, never resorted to the other methods to support any contention. And it then proceeds to talk of many of these things that he expended himself for the benefit of here, which I will now address. He was born here in the heart of the cultural quarter in Gladstone Street, just around the corner there from the former Munster and Leinster Bank. He was the son of Andrew Blake, who was a successful city merchant and shipbroker. There was always that maritime connection. Now, another home in which the family lived was just across the road from here, where the former Power Seeds stood, to the right there of Sergeant's Lane, the other side from the National Bank that was built there later at 29 O'Connell Street. Now, he was educated first in Waterford, spent time in England and France. His older brothers went to Stonyhurst in Lancashire, like many other sons, to a Jesuit school, like the many sons of the wealthy Catholic Waterford merchants, be it Thomas Wise, be it Thomas Francis Marr, and many more. So, but he didn't. He, because of family, currently the then family circumstances. So, as now to go on to his career, from very early he was active. As a young man, he took a keen and active interest in the affairs of the city, be it social, civic, cultural. Indeed, this is a fascinating part, as a 26-year-old, showing indicating what would follow. As a 26-year-old, while an active member of the Mechanics Institute, that was the birth. The Mechanics Institute was founded in Waterford in 1827, around the time he was born, and was based around the corner in Gladstone Street. And he was a member there from a young age. And it must have been flowing from there from his home in what was then Little King Street, that he was very influential and active in advancing the awakened demand for a Waterford School of Art. That must have come up in discussions at the Mechanic Institute. Now, he ever the doer, he successfully persuaded Quaker, an eminent figure in the Quaker community, member of the Meeting House, at the heart of the cultural quarter again, and a director of the Savings Bank, Joshua William Strangman, there. And he, along with Thomas Francis Marr's father, Thomas Marr, who was mayor at the time, managed to obtain the use of the first floor free gratis from the Waterford Savings Bank, which has had a renaissance in our time, in recent times, as the Waterford Art Gallery. So it's rather appropriate that the Waterford's first College of Art and Design started upstairs in this very building. Again, indicating of the great diligence of John A. Before they embarked on that enterprise of the College of Art and Design, he went to Cork. Cork had opened its first gallery in 1850, just before. And this was a pattern of his life. He travelled to Cork to examine, to find out as much as he could the experiences they had and the difficulties and the pluses and the advice in setting up here. So he travelled, all through his career he did meticulous research. And here he was, a 26-year-old, doing this. So within a couple of years, by the time he was 29, and his growing reputation as a doer, he just didn't talk, he always delivered. He was elected mayor in 1855, served 3 terms until 58. Now, he was elected in January of 55. Within 2 months, he had laid plans before the corporation for the establishment of a public park and set wheels in motion, design, funding, application to Parliament for grant. He secured 25% of the final cost of the project and drove the thing. He was ably abetted in that project by the now retired father of Earl Robert, Abraham Robert, who now had retired back and living locally in Newtown Park House up in Newtown. So they set the wheels in motion. Now, what always struck me as remarkable, now the park comprised nearly 12 acres. He employed the top landscape artist in the country, Nevin. It wasn't a green field, it was a marsh, and it had to be drained, and the River Pill had to be diverted. There was a massive loop going through the park. There was no massive earth-shifting machinery available then. They had all that planning done within 9 or 10 months. And from his first putting forward the motion in April 55, they were cutting the ribbon, the Lord Lieutenant, in August 57. Remarkable, from start to finish. Driven by Adwish. Again, he travelled to Galway, what is now Ayr Square. Now, it was just a green area in the middle that had been given to Waterford into Galway by the Eyre family. But he, again, travelled to Galway, and he had Galway antecedents to, again, sort of check out their experience and take advice. But it wasn't starting from scratch, and it wasn't a landscape. So Waterford, thanks to Mr. Wise's drive, John Blake, he created the first landscape public park in Ireland, and only less than 10 years after the first such park in England. It's interesting to remember that they only began to develop Central Park in New York in 1857. So again, he was very progressive. Now, the other remarkable thing, because he was very concerned with social affairs, the health and welfare of the people, and Waterford streets were very narrow. Bardenstrand Street and Broad Street has a good name because it reflects what he did, were just as narrow as High Street or as Lady Lane. Now, he, as a twin project, he drove the widening of Bardenstrand Street and Broad Street and got rid of a lot of things because he was concerned there was a big awareness of the impact that had on public health. So it was a twin project because he then counterbalanced, saw the necessity for an adjacent public park that people, because there was a growing awareness of health and hygiene during that era. So both projects. And interestingly and remarkably, the demolition rubble from Bardenstrand Street and the adjacent streets formed the foundation of the marsh in creating. So the rubble, the demolition of Bardenstrand Street is under the present park. Also, when they were doing the mounds in the park, they used the dredgings from the river, to create the landscape, the sloping landscape there. So it was remarkable. It was a remarkable achievement. He was 29, 30, 31, 32. So the park was opened by an agricultural show late August 1857, and the bridge there in honour of the occasion, the opening by Carlisle, who was a remarkable Lord Lieutenant himself and was Lord Lieutenant on a number of occasions, as his father had been before him. The bridge was named in his honour, Carlisle. There's other Carlisles like Carlisle Pier in Dún Laoghaire, Carlisle Grounds in Bray, and there's many others. O'Connell Bridge was formerly known as Carlisle Bridge, but that was named after his father. And another little detail, that same Lord Lieutenant Carlisle, inspired both by the name the People's Park, which was suggested by one of the local newspapers, sponsored and promoted the opening in the Phoenix Park of the People's Garden. And a statue of him went up there. But both the idea of the public park, a landscape public park, and the name. Other places later adopted the People's Park as a title, Dún Laoghaire, Athy, Limerick. But what was further remarkable about Waterford, from the very beginning, it was free in set. The other places I mentioned, including Stephen's Green, weren't accessible to the general public until much later in that century. We're talking about the 1890s. Stephen's Green wasn't accessible until 1890, and similar dates for the other places I mentioned. So it was genuinely the first public park in the country. And that was all driven from start to finish by the remarkable John Blake. He was elected MP in 1957 and continued to serve the city as MP until 1869. Now, from a couple of years before then, another great interest of his was fisheries and the promotion of the Irish fisheries. So he was appointed Chief Commissioner of the Fisheries in Ireland. Some people say he was the inspector, but I've come across documents which describe him as the Chief Commissioner of the Fisheries. And again, giving his diligence, he left an incredible legacy behind him and is generally acknowledged for the great work that he did. Again, his due diligence in February '68, printed in Waterford, he produced a study of Irish sea fisheries that ran to 147 pages, researched and penned by Blake. And just wait a second there now. I've lost an important sentence. Oh yes, this report to the Chief Secretary of Ireland, who was then Earl Mayo. He was the first secretary, as I said, and this study was entitled The History and Position of the Sea Fisheries in Ireland and How They May Be Made to Afford Increased Food and Employment by John A. Blake, addressed to the Earl of Mayo MP, Chief Secretary for Ireland, printed in the Citizen's Office, a newspaper he founded, on the quay in Waterford. I read a lot of it, and much of it still applies in 2022. And I think it should enjoy a reprint, because a lot of the issues then remain. But it was a remarkable study and a reflection of the thoroughness of Blake's work. One other thing, in '62, while mayor, he served as ex officio governor or chairman of the lunatic asylum on top of Johns Hill. And after his term there, it remained an abiding concern and interest for him. And in 1962, he was good at publishing, he did on education as well later. He produced a report petitioning for a royal commission entitled The Model Treatment of Insanity. Now that was the concept that emerged in the 1830s. The Our Lunatic Asylum, St. Otran's now, was established in 1832, and there was a new awareness. But with the passage of years, it was more honoured in the breach than the observance. And he was concerned at the fallback in the treatment, and again produced a 103-page historic study of model treatment. Model treatment was treating people like human beings, rather than the earlier 18th, 17th, 16th, 15th century of demonizing and exorcism and the appalling, cruel treatment. He was abhorred. But again, when Blake looked at issues like this, he didn't sit back. He did something about it. So his study, again, resulted in action being taken. And he asked in that document to inquire into the treatment pursued in the asylums of the United Kingdom, which included Ireland at the time, and to report upon the system which appears best adapted for carrying out the most appropriate principles of model treatment. Again, I read a considerable section of it, and the detail is impressive. But it's the concern of the man. Now, he returned. He returned to his parliamentary affairs in 1880, and he represented Waterford County on this occasion. There wasn't a vacancy in the city. Now, he stepped down in 84 because he had a rift with Parnell. They differed on tactics. He did the honourable thing and said, I have to step down. Now, he did have a rethink later, and he recognised that Parnell, while it was the plan of campaign, etc., while it had its disadvantages and unfairness, he saw it was the only way, and resumed support for Parnell. From 84, 86, he travelled to Australia, notably Tasmania, fond of travel, and he returned. In 1886, he stood for Carlow, but he didn't last long. He then, as I said, represented them there, but within a year and a bit, he died suddenly in London, at his home in London, on the 26th of May, 1887, of a massive heart attack, which was a great shock to all, and he was much mourned and lamented. Now, just a short note on his personal life. He had married Adelaide Power, a daughter, the third daughter of Nicholas Manpower, who would also have been an MP. But he implacably opposed marriage to Blake, and it was never fully explained. It might have been political differences. It's a remarkable coincidence that Power's grandmother was a Blake, but I don't think they were related. She had married Bartholomew Rivers, another prominent person of the era. So it wasn't until Manpower died in 1873 that they married in 74. And she was with him. He had gone out. She had gone out to the shops or visited a friend for an hour back in May. And when she came home, she found her beloved husband dead. So their marriage was short enough lived. The chief mourner at their funeral was Adelaide's brother Patrick, who also became an MP. And he was buried at in London in Kensal Green. His widow paid for a magnificent stained glass window in the Faith Lake Church. A church, incidentally, financed and built for her father years before that. Now I'll finish, and then a brief comment. Now, also at the time, it's a shorter but to the point obituary that appeared in the Nation newspaper. So it's only a couple of sentences long, 2 short paragraphs. and it appeared in The Nation on the 28th of May, 1887. Again, it sums up the man well. A genuine grief has been occasioned to the Irish Parliamentary Party by the sudden death of their esteemed colleague, Mr. John A. Blake, member for Carlow, and their feeling is one which will be common to the whole Irish people. Mr. Blake may truly be said to have sacrificed his life in their cause. He well knew that his condition of health was critical and that regular hours and avoidance of fatigue were absolutely necessary precautions against dangerous consequences. Yet he stood with his colleagues at all hours in the fight against the coercion bill. But for his self-sacrificing labours in that respect, he would in all probability be living man today. Mr. Blake was a convinced, thorough and earnest Home Ruler, and he did much to inspire younger men with confidence in the triumph of their cause. He was a genial and charming companion, possessed of a fund of varied knowledge and experience, the fruit of a life of observation, of reading and of travel. In the House of Commons, he was a favourite with all parties, and his death is universally regretted. And then there was a vote of condolence to his widow. We'll give her the last word. We'll give them the last word of her, where they sent their condolences. That we, the members of the IPP, desire to convey to Mrs. Blake the expression of the deepest sympathy and sorrow at the sudden death of her husband, our esteemed colleague and dear friend, whose steadfast and consistent career as a supporter of the cause of Irish legislative independence secured for him the respect of all, and whose genial nature and generous heart won him the affection of all those who were happy enough to be brought into companionship with him. I think that's a fine note to finish on. In recent times, 2017, Mr. Patrick Kennedy, a native of Ballybricken, now a member of the London Chamber of Commerce. Kensal Green, St. Mary's Kensal Green was Catholic cemetery for a long time in London. And his grave was left to fall into decay and in poor order. So a fund was set up and a committee was set up to restore and upgrade the grave as a fitting tribute to such a remarkable man, which was done in June 2017, 130 years after he's died. And the officiating at that ceremony was another great Waterford native, Dan Mulhall, who was then the ambassador of the UK, who led the thing. Members of the descendants, Blake descendants of the family, were also present on the occasion. So that he was fittingly remembered in London, with his bicentenary approaching in 4 years' time. I think Waterford should restore, revisit the remarkable, and pay respect to the remarkable career of John A. Blake.
Thanks, Joe. That's great. It's great to get that. Do you want to move on to Dominican? Do you want to get some water?
Yeah.
Dominican then.
On record there.
God, he was an amazing man for his...
Absolutely, and that's only That's only a sample. That's only a sample of his career. And I saw a note in one of the papers at the time about some project was proposed. But given that this project is being organised by John Blake, we can be assured that it will be, given his energy and diligence, that it will be delivered. Absolutely. People said, look, he said, let's do it. It was done. Our modern councillors could learn from him. And so on. Now, for the benefit of Keith, I have assembled various photographs, which I can send on if you don't have them, and then you can use what you like. I would like to talk about initially the history of the Dominicans in Waterford, their original historic presence, their departure, and then their return towards the end of the 19th century. And to speak of the much appreciated decorative art of the church, with some interesting names associated with that work. The Dominican orders were the first religious order of the Norman era to establish themselves in Waterford, which they did in 1226. In 1235, they were granted leave by order of Henry III to build the Black Abbey at its location in Black Abbey Street there, at Arundel. And it's interesting, I came across to note that I came across Blackfriars Abbey in Arundel in Sussex in England, which was founded just 5 years previously. The Howards were involved there, and I'm sure that there was a direct connection. So they were there for the next 300 years until the order, serving and building a reputation, until the suppression, like other monasteries and abbeys, the suppression by Henry VIII in 1541. A Father William Martin was the last OP prior at the time. They subsequently maintained a low-profile presence over the subsequent centuries. Often they just blended in with the circular priests and everything. But the last of them left Waterford, Father Duan, in 1850. But later that century, there was a great revival in church building in Ireland, with the following Catholic emancipation and growing confidence of the Irish Catholic nation. In 1865, Bishop John Power invited the Dominicans to return to Waterford and pick up where it left off. Now, in 1967, they set up in an old corn store, which was a feature of early church, a temporary church there, and established an oratory in Bridge Street. So they have remained, they subsequently built their church then on that site. And wheels were set in motion then, 72, 73, the foundation stone was laid. the first mass was 74, and it was officially blessed and consecrated in 1876. That was the kind of time frame, and then moved on from that. Now, it was, given its location, the architecture, had to blend. So it was a mix of Italianate, but also functional. If you view St. Saviour's from O'Connell Street, formerly Queen Street, you will see that it replicates the side of a corn store, because that was the environment it was in. And its tower, again, is off-centre. Now, its architect was George Goldie of Goldie and Child, of England originally, but such was the boom in church building in Ireland that they opened, and Goldie established an office in Cork. A lot of work. Now, it was remarkable. This boom was driven and very much inspired by the architecture, or pointed architecture, neo-Gothic, some people say. The currency at the time was pointy architecture of Pugin. Both Augustus, the main originator, and his son Edward, but other sons as well. But Edward was the man in Ireland. So, but Goldie was the architect here, and again from a strong English Catholic background and a big supporter of Daniel O'Connell, and he became the favoured architect of the autarky of the era, and he proved popular in Waterford as well. He was, apart from here, he was involved with the architect of St. John's College. And there's a Last Supper altar feature there, which many attribute to James Pearse, whom we'll return to. He also, Goldie, was involved with the Good Shepherds. And there, on a Person Road, Martin O'Dwyer used to have the restaurant in Mary Street. I remember he saying a couple of years ago that he himself discovered some years ago that a grandniece of Goldie married one of his great-granddaughters or something like that. So he said he never realised when he had the restaurant locally that he was passing his cousin's church, which, Martin enjoyed the connection. So the emerging church, the new St. Saviour's, was further enhanced by the work of the most notable ecclesiastic sculptor of that era, James Pearse, the father, as we all know, of Patriot Patrick and Willie Pearse. As I say, his work here is featured in a series of statues in St. Saviour's, which are situated at the top of the pillars down the central aisle, depicting many of the saintly figures of the Dominican order, including St. Catherine of Siena. Now, St. Catherine of Siena was a remarkable 13th century Dominican figure. She was a doctor of the church, she was a mystic, as if it sounds contradictory, she was an activist, an orator, and a mentor to many popes. So she's a very important figure in the history of the Dominicans. Now I now would like to just give a short pen picture of James Pearse. James Pearse actually was born in London, in Bloomsbury, in London, in 1838. Now, his people had been Anglican or nonconformists, but he, as a man growing up, was pretty much an agnostic in his youth, and he came from a long tradition of artisan sort of craftsmanship. The family going back to Devon, again associated with such matters. When he was 6 or 7, the family moved to Birmingham, himself and his brothers. And then he moved among the carvers and sculptors of that, and began to engage in the ecclesiastical church building and decoration that had swept through England, driven greatly by another Waterford man, Nicholas Wiseman, who was made cardinal, and other figures. So this way, and Impugin very much involved, and this wave drove itself through England in particular, but Scotland as well. But after that boom, there was a decline, and the surge was building in Ireland. So James Pearse and 4 other families of that craft followed the work to Ireland, where they were in great demand and very much part of that community. So he moved to Dublin with his young wife, Emily Fox, with whom he had 2 children, Mary Emily, after the mother, Emily Fox, and James Vincent. But and they very much mixed with the McLaughlin family. Later, that first daughter married into the McLaughlin family. And interestingly, just go slightly ahead with the story, none of the, he then, apart from Emily, sorry, I've lost my train of thought there a bit. His daughter married one of the McLaughlins, and following his marriage to Margaret Brady, he set up his own company the following year in 1878 in Brunswick Street. Brunswick Street today is known as Pearse Street, to mark that event, and there's a plaque up to his sons Patrick and Willie there as the place of their birth. And he set up his sculpturing own company there. The family quickly came along with Margaret Mary in 78, Patrick Henry, PH, in 79, Willie in 81, and another daughter in 88, Mary Bridget. His business flourished, but sudden death, as we suggested earlier, came calling in 1900, aged just 60, while visiting his brother in Birmingham. Patrick was just 20. I was just 20 at the time. And the last piece on Pearse, an obituary appeared long before his sons were ever known, in the Irish Independent on the 8th of September in 1900. There was also a lengthier one in the Freeman's Journal. The Independent one said, "The death of Mr. James Pearse of Great Brunswick Street, which was announced elsewhere in this edition, will be met with deep regret by a large number of the citizens of Dublin. The deceased gentleman was one of the leading ecclesiastical sculptors in the city, and it may indeed be said to have been the pioneer of modern Gothic art as applied to church work in this country. Almost every important church in Ireland contains in the shape of an altar or figure monuments of his artistic skill. Perhaps outside of churches, perhaps the best work of his chisel is the fine heroic group which crowned the facade of the National Bank in College Green. Now, to conclude, only Willie followed him into the family tradition as an ecclesiastical sculptor. His most notable work being the fine Pieta executed in 1906 in St. Andrew's Church in Westland Row, their family parish church. But gave up this in 1910 to join his brother Patrick at Skull Nave Enders. By Easter 1916, they both had carved their names and deeds onto the monumental pages of modern Irish history. Now, in the 1940s, saw the involvement of a Father John Houston towards the decoration and drawing of cartoons, prelude to frescoes in the church, and sketches were drawn up by I have a blank there for a moment, by a John Harley, but funds were not available at the time, and the project was postponed for 9 years. Now, John Houston was born Michael Houston, and he was the younger brother of Sean Houston, again of 1916, after whom Euston Station is named. Interestingly, while many of those who were executed in 16, all of them, their names were given to various stations around the country. But there was a compelling reason that Euston Station was called after Sean Euston, is because he worked there. There and in Limerick, where the family had connections. And Michael was then a novitiate in the Dominican order, and he got leave to visit his brother on the eve of his execution. When he was professed into the Dominicans, he took the name John in tribute to his brother. So henceforth, he was a brilliant polymath, mathematician, artist, photographer. Lived until he was 1984, and he contributed to the decoration of the Dominican Priory in Limerick, but also in Rome, where he spent some time. So that's another link. We had James and father of Patrick, and here we had the work and the inspiration of Sean Houston's brother, John, associated with the Dominican, St. Saviour's Dominican Church. Now, when they did get going, there are many. There was the Renaissance of the Renaissance in sort of church decor at the time, and the church is done in remarkable, vivid colours. Now, there's two notable. One that people comment on are the historic frescoes, which depict in the lower apse. And there's the one depicts, there's divided opinion about the first, the Bishop of Waterford, the first, Malchus, baptizing a Danish prince. Others say that it depicts Henry III, who granted the building of Blackfriars, and in 35, and it was him accepting the submission to the will of God by the Dominican friar at the time. The other one depicts Saint Otteran, who was the patron saint of Waterford, and the name is attached to many places in Waterford subsequently. The other is Geoffrey of Waterford, a 13th century scholar of Waterford, which was the great scholar of the church and philosopher, and translated much of Aristotle's work and so on. And he was a most influential, significant figure in the history of the Dominicans in Waterford. And finally, moving forward a century or two, is a figure on horseback which depicts Cromwell at the walls of Waterford, the Heathfield siege. And the reason why he is there is that the famous restored statue, not restored, and the original statue of Our Lady of Waterford, which is housed in the St. Saviour's Church to this day, that they claim that it was through her intervention that Waterford was saved from the hands of Cromwell, and that's depicted. So they're the historical frescoes that record the history of the Dominicans in Waterford. Now, there's another one of strong local interest in St. Joseph's Chapel. There's 4 what I call local angels. There's 4 angelic figures featured around the central figure. And the models for those were 4 local girls. One going from left to right, you had Maura Condon, later Keane, mother of the well-known artist Margaret Keane. There was Cora Grace, Bernadette Crowe, and there's 2 names, Kitty Blackmore stroke Bow, one again a maiden name and married name there. So there are featured there, and all members of the family are very proud to have them in such august company in the church.
And who paid that?
That was done by Father, I should have said that. That work was carried out by Father Angus Buckley in about 4950, 51, that era. Again, he was a very gifted artist, and it was he carried that out.
And how the Dominicans left Waterford now?
I looked in there last week. I said I better have a look in before I speak. And there was a very old Dominican priest up at the altar rail hearing confessions. So there's 1 or 2 left. I know the Franciscans have completely gone.
Yeah, and I think the Dominicans left Ballybeg. They were in Ballybeg.
Yes, yeah, they had, because they had taken up parochial
So they must be still
and walked a number of churches there. But when I went in, and there was a good few people there. It was the first Catholic church I was in when I came to Waterford. We lived, and it was a very attractive church to go to. Yeah, and go on, and it's a city gem, yeah, and so on, and part and part. So,
Joe, thanks very much once again. You're some man. You're some man for wood, man. You're like our John A. Blake. Said you're like our John Blake. Thanks very much.